Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to this EMCC Global session on regulation. Why should we care? Should we care about it? And I'm here today with Domi. Go ahead, Domi. You want to introduce yourself? Say hi.
Hello, everybody. I'm Domi Hollosi from Hungary, EMCC local country organization. I am the former president in our organization, and I'm very looking forward to this session. Thanks, Mary.
Okay, great to be working with Domi. He's going to share with us the exciting things that they've been doing in EMCC Hungary. I'm here in my capacity of work group leader for EMCC Global Regulation. And as a bit of background, I've been coaching for nearly 20 years in organizations all over the world and mainly in the EU. And I've been a member of EMCC since 2006 and president of EMCC Luxembourg for the last 4 years. So one of the increasingly frequent questions I get from members of EMCC Luxembourg is how can we raise awareness and the profile of professional coaches and mentors here in Luxembourg. The advent of the COVID pandemic has seen a huge rise in the number of people calling themselves coaches and mentors. And of course, before COVID, there were many who did the same. I'm asked, why don't we regulate the profession? Well, actually, it's not that simple, and it does require a huge investment in terms of collaboration, energy, and other resources across the actors in the coaching, mentoring, and supervision industry. On the other hand, regulation is often considered by practitioners to be quite vague or obscure and not particularly interesting until, of course, it happens to them in their country. So in some countries, governments have made attempts to regulate coaching, where they attempt to regulate it either directly, i.e., who can call themselves a coach, or indirectly through imposing standards via training or education schools. And when this happens, it typically involves a huge amount of work for the coaching associations, and like with many things in life, can be viewed as an opportunity or as a threat. And EMCC has, since 2009, been monitoring these moves as there's a concern that governments might regulate in a way that doesn't support practitioners or help the clients of coaching, and may in fact impose these unhelpful constraints on those carrying out the profession. So from our experience and yours, I have no doubt, we know that anyone can and does call themselves a coach, often with people with very little experience, no training, no commitment to CPD, and without adherence to a code of ethics. And of course, the risk for clients are significant, as is the reputational risk of the profession itself. Our work group comprises these wonderful people, and I'll just introduce them briefly. Tony's a senior practitioner coach and our legal regulation expert. She is a lawyer with nearly 15 years experience as principal legal advisor at the General Medical Council, which is the independent regulator of doctors in the UK. So this is the council dedicated to promoting good medical practice and high standards of medical education and training in the UK. And of course, for holding the register and license for doctor practitioners. So she comes with that wealth of experience in regulation of professions. David Slater is, and I'm sure you have seen him, he's been in EMCC for a very long time. He's a master practitioner coach and mentor and an accredited ESIA supervisor. David's previous role in EMCC was International VP Quality, where he oversaw its work on the ethical code, competencies, CPD, supervision, diversity and inclusion, and of course, regulation. He's currently EMCC UK Governor and has been involved with mediation more recently in regards to our complaints and disciplinary procedure. And Michel Moral, again, a face I'm sure you recognize. After a long career in IBM and obtaining his doctorate in clinical psychopathology, he has been working as executive and team coach and is renowned for his work in coaching supervision. He's an accredited ESIA supervisor and trains supervisors via his ESQA Supervision Training Academy in France. He received the prestigious EMCC Supervisor Award in 2009. And last but not least, Paramita Pranya, who is a senior practitioner coach who's been working as an executive and leadership coach for nearly 20 years. Formerly a diplomat, Paramita holds a huge experience in international relationships and affairs. She's an accredited coach with the European institutions, coaching senior managers and members of cabinets of commissioners and their teams. She is our liaison point with the European institutions. So our work group really works to monitor moves by government across our affiliated countries and regions and produces a yearly country survey report capturing experience, learnings and outcomes in each country and sharing best practices to do with our self-regulatory profession. We also liaise with the EU and make recommendations to the Global Executive Board to make sure that our self-regulatory processes are robust. So what are we going to do here today? Here's what we're hoping to go with you. And Domi, if you could change your slides, that would be great. Okay, so we're going to take a little bit of time just defining what is regulation, what are we here to talk about, and then give a very brief historical perspective of the different moves that we've seen happening in affiliated countries and the lessons that we've learned there. And Domi will come in and talk about the experience, the most recent experience from Hungary, how they coped with it and how they really rose to the challenge to make it a success story in their country. There'll be 2 breakout rooms where I invite you to discuss what, in your view, should regulation of coaching cover. So what are the kind of minimum standards that you would like to see? Have a brief discussion of, well, what are some of the challenges around it and why it's so important that we collaborate with other actors in the industry. We'll have a final breakout on what you can already be doing in your country to support self-regulation or indeed prepare for future potential governmental regulation moves. And we'll end with some conclusions and a goodbye. So let's move to the next slide and just have a quick look at, what is regulation? What in fact are we talking about? Regulation of many goods and services is intrinsic to living in a civilized and safe society. People are not free to sell exactly what they want. When we buy food, it contains what the packaging says it will. It does not contain toxins. Sometimes, additionally, there's a legal requirement that it be produced in accordance with certain standards. When we go to the doctor, we expect the doctor to be legally required to meet certain standards. Failure to meet these standards can lead to prosecution and sanctions. All of this is regulation. A good example of an unregulated market, therefore, is that of illegal drugs. Because they're illegal, governments cannot impose standards. Buyers of illegal drugs have to trust that they're getting what they're paying for. They cannot know if the ingredients are exactly what have been promised. There may be cheaper materials mixed with it, and some of these may be toxic. Some of the damage caused by illegal drugs is caused not only by the substances themselves, but of course the other substances added. So regulation is a government-imposed limitation of behaviors of individuals or organizations, and it refers to the implementation of rules backed up by the law. In 2008, coaches, organizations, professional bodies, coaching clients and training groups across the 5 continents came together for a period of a year to discuss the future of coaching. And one of the outcomes of what they call the Dublin Declaration was that we should try to be self-regulated. Otherwise, governments would do it for us. It's for that reason that we're interested in being self-regulated. And at EU level, self-regulation is defined as the possibility for economic operators, so us, different coaching organizations, social partners, non-governmental organizations or associations, to adopt amongst themselves and for themselves guidelines at European level, particularly codes of practice or agreements. So in order to demonstrate that the coaching and mentoring profession was capable of setting and upholding these standards, EMCC initiated a drafting and submission to the EU of a professional charter for coaching and mentoring in 2011. This still stands. It is the basis of our self-regulatory status and was additionally signed by ICF, the Association for Coaching, and the Société Française du Coaching. So all in all, the function of regulation is to promote practice that is sound and to eradicate practice that is not. So when we talk about what has happened, I'm going to give a very brief historical perspective on what's happened around Europe in affiliated countries. So if we start on the next slide, Domi, with Romania. So this move was driven by lobbyists and governments to regulate coaching in Romania. The Ministry of Labour and Social Protection and the National Authority for Qualifications defined the coaching occupation, the qualifications for coaching, and a training curriculum. These standards were driven by a few local coaching schools, mainly NLP-based, to align with their existing curricula. And despite intervention by EMCC at the time, these lobbyists drove the process. And while ICF and EMCC competencies frameworks were consulted, the resulting standard is a hybrid and very difficult to compare with any of the EMCC or ICF frameworks. So they regulated the title of coaching, which was a coaching specialist, and the qualifications required, which was to have a university degree and at least 3 years of employment experience. Curriculum for the training were also defined in 3 modules: the fundamentals of coaching process, specific coaching techniques, which were NLP, because that's how it was driven, and organizing the coaching activity. So the results are sort of hybrid and not terribly favorable to the professions itself. In Turkey, in 2018, there was a governmental drive to regulate the coaching title as a profession. So EMCC Turkey and ICF Turkey, together with KPD, which is a local coaching association, made the necessary filing for coaching to be officially accepted as a profession, and the announcement was made in the official gazette. So a good example of great collaboration in building that. So the official title of coach now appears, and there was sort of minor moves by governments to regulate such things such as classroom size and lighting for coaching schools. In Italy, the case was different. This was driven by coaching associations wanting to professionalize the industry. So the first Italian standard on coaching was published in November 2015 and sets out the definition, classification, characteristics, and requirements of coaching activity. But it does not yet define the skills and competencies of professional coaches. So while there is a definition of coaching as a professional service, and they describe the context in which coaching can take place, the sort of root canal work, the competencies and skills, has yet to be defined. And given the COVID situation, these talks with ICF Italy, AICP Italy, which is a big local association, is still ongoing. I think the most complex case of regulation is in France, and this has been going on about 4 years now, and it's really indirect regulation driven by government. In brief, there was a move by the Ministry of Labour to grant coaching, mentoring and supervision schools with funding only if they complied with national qualifications framework. So the French NQF consists of registration in the RNCP, so the Répertoire National des Certifications Professionnelles, and must comply also with a quality decree through registration in what they call the Qualopi list of providers. Registration in the RNCP means that schools can only prove that that schools must prove that their training has an impact on employability of the trainees. So in response to this, EMCC France, along with many other coaching associations in France and other interested parties, created CIMAX, which is an interprofessional union which represents all the different career paths around support and coaching. So the objective was to create a single body for all those professional bodies that could represent coaching, mentoring, supervision, and other helping professions to the public authorities and to unions in France. So the primary function or action plan of CIMAX is to create definitions for the 3 professions of professional coach, organizational coach and supervisor, to create related competencies for these 3 professions and have these competencies accepted and rubber stamped by the French authorities. So very different in different countries. So there's no one size fits all, but what's common across the country is the amount of volunteer hours, collaboration and energy to sort of respond to these governmental moves. So let's hear how they did that in Hungary. Over to you, Devine.
Thanks, Mary. With a bit different intention, but the Hungarian government decided to strictly regulate the healthcare and related industries in 2020. The official aim was to legislate significantly limit the activities of uncertain quality and unclear background of healthcare providers. So in the early 2020, an unexpected and a very serious change to the law came into effect in Hungary without any grace period, known as the Charlatans Law. 3 amendments to the law entered into force that heavily affect those working in the field of coaching, mentoring, and supervision in Hungary, together with many, many other professions. So not only for coaching, mentoring, and supervision. It covered the whole industry. So let's see them one by one. The infringement law changes. The law prohibits the use of professional titles which can be obtained through a Hungarian state higher education system. So what does it mean in practice? I can only call myself coach lawfully if I obtain my diploma degree certificate from a state's higher education college or university, regardless of any other private training institution certificate previously obtained. So if I want to call myself coach again, I have to go back to finish a university course on coaching. The criminal law, the second one. The law prohibits the pursuit of any activities in the field of psychotherapeutic practice by persons who don't have any clinical psychologist or psychiatric qualification. So in practice, what it means, we don't know. The legislation does not specify what it considers as psychotherapeutic practice and what is not. So in any other regulation or definition in Hungarian law, there is no what methodologies or procedures belong to psychotherapy. This is a serious legal uncertainty in our field because we don't know if we are acting lawfully or not when we do coaching. So on the top of this law can punish you 1 year in prison. if any lawful psychotherapeutic methodology use is found. And the third one is in the higher education law. The law prohibits non-governmental training institutions from awarding graduates the professional qualifications and titles which are available in higher education institutions. So any of the Hungarian private coach training, supervision training, which was lawfully operating in Hungary before, they cannot give you any certificate on your coaching or mentoring or supervision title. So if you have one, that doesn't act anymore. As we see in Hungary, the aim of the legislation changing is good because they want to limit the charlatans. But what happened in real life, it is disastrous. It seriously affects at least 20,000 professionals in Hungary in the field of mental hygiene and related fields in Hungary. So, on the other hand, the new regulation significantly restricts the training opportunities of these professions, and it's highly eliminating the already established self-regulatory status of coaching, mentoring, and supervision in Hungary. Okay, so in EMCC Hungary and the whole industry was in shock and panic at that time. First of all, we had to understand what was in the law because it was really unexpected and there was not any public discussion or any professional discussion before the laws came into effect. Hungary is a very good laboratory for lawmaking without any social or wider professional discussion. So what cannot happen in many countries in EU, Hungary can do that within a short period with legislation. So EMCC Hungary, in the first round, we discussed the bills and what expected consequences with our professional organization, Hungarian Coaching Organization Association. We have a great organization in Hungary, which collects most of the big Hungarian coaching, mentoring, and supervision associations and organizations. So we have a good and strong association in Hungary, together with ICF and many others. So in cooperation with them, we involved legal experts to interpret the bills first and plan the possible actions, what we have to make and what we can make. And in parallel, we also formulated our questions to the ministry directly about this legal uncertainty. Okay, so in EMCC Hungary, in the first round, we discussed the bills and its expected consequences with our professional organization, together with the Hungarian Coaching Organization Association. We have a great coaching association in Hungary. It collects most of the big coaching, mentoring, and supervision organizations. And in cooperation with them, we involved legal experts to interpret the bills and plan the possible actions we have to take, or what we can take and make. And in parallel, we also formulated questions to the ministry directly about this legal uncertainty. Many other Hungarian NGOs was working hard to put pressure on the legislation to normalize the current unrealistic legal situation, and they organized a conference. We supported them, we participated on this conference with many co-professional organizations on the field of mental hygiene and inviting the press and the media. And there was more than 1,000 people joined online and offline to this conference and has a loud media echo. Most of the big Hungarian press and media was discussed this case, and we gained a great publicity after that. Parallel, we called the attention, of course, of the board of EMCC Global. We got a great support from the board and the regulation group. The President Riza came to one of our online meetings to encourage our members, our board, and to help to find solutions for this case. And what we can do is only forward. So we collaborated with a higher education institution to start short specialized trainings, 3 or 4 semester long coach mentor trainings, where EMCC EIA accredited coaches and mentors could obtain their degrees in a significantly easier and discounted way. We informed our membership of every step and every current new information. We organized meetups for our members and non-members of EMCC Hungary and help them to understand the new legal environment and plan their further education in order to get their official coach degree. So we was working hard, and there was effect of this work in the legislation system, and especially in higher education. Many higher education, university and colleges started specialized trainings in last September's in coaching, especially in coaching. 2 of them applied for EMCC EQA accreditation with more than 100 students, and several EMCC members are teaching on these trainings and involved in the whole curriculum. Also, we have many new members joined to EMCC Hungary because many freelancer coaches wanted to join to some of the associations, some of the organizations, to get near to the fire and to get information and help from organizations, coaching organizations. And the biggest success was that 2 of the bills were partially modified, so many of the professional titles can be freely used again, including coaching, mentoring, and supervision titles. But it is just right now, until a BA or MA training will be started in any college or university in Hungary, the situation will be the same as before, and we will not able to use the coach and mentor and supervision titles. And great initiatives started with our association in Hungary. We set up the Hungarian official standards for coaching and coach training providers based on EMCC and ICF standards, and established a state-approved examination center for coaching. Another great initiative started in Hungary, and we are trying to form the Hungarian Coach Chamber, which is legally recognized by the state. So, Mary, I will give you back.
Okay, thank you, Domi, and so great to hear that you, both the outcomes, but how you went about addressing this movement and the wonderful successes you've had. So if we go to the next slide, just to sort of give an overview, very brief overview about what is it that governments have attempted to regulate. We've heard that the assignation of professional title, or the denomination of the title of coach, mentor, supervisor, is somewhere where governments want to regulate. So we've seen it in Hungary, of course, but also Romania, the coaching specialist, in France with the 3 titles, professional coach, organization coach, and supervisor, and in Norway, their work on the ISO standards towards coach. Governments also attempt to regulate through education and qualifications, and we've had a nice overview from Domi about how that's attempted to be done and how coaching organizations can respond. The same thing with training schools, particularly in France, and what their curricula should be. Also, some governments try to define what working experience a person should have. So we've seen that in Italy and Romania. And finally, how coaching is classified. Is it classified, for example, as in Hungary as a helping profession, or in Italy as a professional service, or an organizational service? So these are the kinds of areas that governments tend to regulate in. So what we'd like you to do is to go into your breakout rooms and think together, you know, if you had to regulate or could choose how we would go about regulating coaching, mentoring or supervision, what should it cover? What would be minimum standards that a regulation could cover? So thank you for your interesting conversation around those areas. Let's go now to the next slide, where we talk about sort of the regulation of professions, the main categories that are typically covered, not only for coaching, mentoring, and supervision, but more generally in terms of professions. So the first big area, as we've seen and you've talked about, is education. The quality of the education and training to ensure people have the skills and the knowledge to practice, both competently and safely. So if we think it's about things like accreditation and the kinds of awards that EMCC gives to schools with their EQAs, with the ESQAs, and more recently, the team coaching TCQA. Of course, standards is absolutely central when we talk about regulation. So standards of competence and conduct, which professionals must meet in order to practice. So an adherence to a code of ethics. So in terms of EMCC, we have our competence frameworks for coaches, mentors, and supervisors. For coaches and mentors, we have 4 levels of competencies. So we have the EIA, the European Individual Accreditation. Same thing with supervisors, the ESIA, and more recently, the ITCA, so the Individual Team Coaching Accreditation. And in EMCC, we do have an equivalent of our competency framework and accreditation with levels of EU frameworks of education. We also have processes that recognize prior experience and learning. And then we have the mentoring accreditations, the ISMCP and the PMQA for mentoring programs in organizations. We now have 8 signatories to our Global Code of Ethics, a CPD guideline for coaches, mentors, and supervisors, and of course, our Diversity and Inclusion Declaration. All this would fall under standards of the profession. And then there's typically a form of register. I mentioned earlier the registry for doctors in the UK. So maintaining a register of professionals to which everyone, including the general public, can search. So typically a regulating body of the register would ensure that professionals in that database are engaged in CPD. They maintain themselves up to date with the latest knowledge and research, and that they are fit for practice. And this would be something that they would verify on a yearly or a regular basis to ensure that the persons on these registers would still be valid. We don't have such a registration because we don't have a coaching or mentoring body, regulatory body per se. But what typically coaching associations do, I know EMCC does and ICF, they do have a database open to the public of accredited coaches, mentors, and supervisors. And lastly, there's the fitness to practice. So this is a possibility to investigate people on the register and decide if they can be allowed to continue to practice, and if so, on what terms. As there is no regulatory register, the way that coaching associations do this, and particularly at EMCC, is that we have a complaints and disciplinary procedure. This was revised in 2019 and is one way in which we can ensure that coaches are fit to practice, that members of the public or organizations can launch a complaint about coaches, coaching schools, and that follow-up and potential sanctions would be possible. So what are the challenges, if we go to the next slide, Domi, around this whole regulation question? Well, as you've heard, it's very difficult to know where and how governments will attempt to regulate, even though that we know that regulation per se does tend to support quality practice. But because there are no generally accepted, identifiable and distinct coaches for coaches and mentors and supervisors, this makes it more challenging to define those standards. Also, training and education are not currently required in many countries to practice as a coach, mentor, or supervisor. And of course, the general public does not universally recognize our professions as such. There are also a wide range of professional bodies that we know about throughout the world, and many practitioners don't belong to any of them. And of course, there's no unified, defined theory upon which we base our practice. We have things from NLP to psychological coaches to positive psychology coaches. We have a lot of sports coaches, life coaches. So there's not a unifying theory per se. It's a very diverse profession. Of course, one of the things that's a major drawback is if we had a real regulatory system or body globally, this would require funding. Because as you've heard from Domi, we're required to have a lot of legal expertise, media involvement, communication with the press, and also just a body that would run a register, per se, of people who are fit for practice. And typically, we don't find regulation very high on the agenda of many countries, mainly because it's low risk. If we go to the doctor, of course, we need to be absolutely 100% sure that they are fit to practice. Otherwise, we die. It's not quite as urgent in coaching, in that people don't die, as far as we know, from having been through coaching, mentoring, and supervision. But it doesn't become high on our agendas unless it comes from governmental moves. And one of the things that we do know, and Domi's story so wonderfully illustrates, is that we need to collaborate and we need to partner with a whole range of organizations. So on the next slide, Domi, this consultation, in fact, needs to be industry and profession-wide, not just the EMCC, would need to involve the whole range of other organizations. And we would all need to agree on what a minimum standard for coaching, mentoring, and supervising would be, what is good enough, where do we place the bar, at which level of competence. And of course, we need to involve other stakeholders, our clients, customers, schools, training providers, universities. And of course, to be recognized, for example, at EU level, there are some quite strict criteria. Who's involved in regulating the professions? Who are the stakeholders? How is that being financed? How do we monitor and follow up that people adhere to a code of ethics, that the complaints and disciplinary procedures are being used and treated, so on and so forth? And how do we ensure that it's legally compliant in the different countries in which coaching, mentoring, and supervision would be taking place? So as you've heard, regulation may not be coming down the line at you in your country and governments, but there's already a lot of things that we can be doing to support our self-regulatory status, our professionalization, and reaching out and across to other associations and stakeholders in the industry. So we'd like to hear from you. What do you think you can already be doing in your country to support self-regulatory practices and prepare potentially for regulatory moves? So thank you for our wonderful discussion. And we know that we've, only touched the sort of top of the iceberg here. So you can contact me at any time if you have a general question around regulation, or Domi.
Yes, thank you. Please feel free to contact me if you need any information or more deeper insight of the Hungarian situation. And we are really here to help you. And what Mary, what you suggested, this collaboration, is also calls you to collaborate with the EMCC local country groups and country organizations, so we can share information, we can help you to be proactive, we can support you with our knowledge and our experiences. So please feel free to contact us.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.